Hello, and welcome to our 21 edition of FSI Fridays. I'm Johansson live in Charlotte, joined by Edwin in Boston.
Hey, Johansson, what do we have lined up today?
Happy Friday, Edwin. So today we're going to talk about the data platform transformation and hear perspectives and why it's critical to create a strategy. Next, we'll talk about three important buckets that we think about when data modernization strategies and how Microsoft can help accelerate data insights and analytics. Third, we're going to see a demo aligning all the pieces together and showing the end-to-end story. Then we'll wrap it up with some Q&A today on FSI Fridays.
Happy Friday, Johansson, and for those of you watching on live on YouTube, as a quick reminder, we'll spend about 30 minutes on today's topic, leave the last 10 minutes to address any burning questions, so please use the Q&A window and we'll monitor for questions during the presentation. If you're watching the recording, feel free to use the comments below to ask your questions. So let's go ahead and get started and meet the presenter for today. We are honored to be joined by Joe Carver, Cloud Solution Architect Director for U.S. Financial Services. So thanks for being on the show today, Joe. Can you let us know and the audience know what your role is at Microsoft and what your typical day is? I also hear you picked up some new hobbies over the last few months and have some strong competition from your other half.
Hey, thanks, Edwin. Thanks, Johansson, and thanks for having me on. Absolutely. So Joe Carver, Cloud Solution Architect Director, Financial Services for the U.S. My role is really just kind of working with my team and making sure our customers understand our data platform technologies and how that integrates into their digital transformations. A typical day for me is taking probably 4 to 5 customer calls, and then also working with my team of cloud solution architects that are actually spending time with our customers. In a pre-COVID world, we'd be out on site helping them day to day. Now everything's via Teams. Oh, with respect to the golf, that's what you're referring to. Yeah, COVID has been, a curse and somewhat of a blessing. I have tried to find a silver lining. And so one of the things that's been very positive for me and my wife is being able to get out and enjoy the golf course. It was really one of the only things that was open in our local area. And they changed some of the formats, right? You couldn't touch the pin. You actually had to have one person per cart. You did all of your transaction for paying for your round virtually. So, and you still had to wear a mask and do those types of things. So very safe environment, but it was just such a blessing to get out and actually get out of the house. And yes, my wife is getting really good and I could be in trouble.
Thanks, Joe. It looks like you have some stiff competition there. So back to business. For many of our financial services customers, when they think about this topic of data modernization, it's much larger than this, right? They're really real digital transformation efforts that our financial services customers are going through. So Joe, do you want to walk us through some of the examples Microsoft has done with customers and maybe some of the perspectives across the different industries that we have within financial services? Maybe let's start with banking.
Yeah, thanks, Johansson. That's actually true, right? And the data transformation piece or the data platform modernization is really just one part of a larger outcome in terms of digital transformations for our customers. So we typically are talking about with our customers in terms of a larger scenario. We try to keep that in terms of being business oriented. There's occasions when we do have, wholesale data platform modernization strategy conversations with people like enterprise architects, or maybe you have a data center modernization where it's coming from an IT perspective. But we found really in working with our customers, the data modernization story is really much better when we talk about it in the context of solving a business process. So I wanted to make sure we just kind of highlighted that particular piece. So if this is looking at from a banking perspective, which is the segment that I cover, you can see that we've got multiple scenarios here. So whether you're trying to empower your employees or try to manage the risk across the organization, combating financial crime is huge right now in terms of the conversations that we're having with our customers. Modernizing your payments and core banking platforms is also a very large topic right now. But all of these, you can see, if you think about them, they have an underlying data platform story to them. And that's where we really focused on, if we modernize the data platform without actually having a business outcome, what's the point of doing it? So we want to make sure that we're actually delivering business value when we do that. So if we look at this one, the case in point, UBS really managed increased what they could do from a risk standpoint by leveraging Azure and our data platforms. So they basically went to 100% faster risk calculations while also dropping about 40% of their infrastructure costs.
I mean, that's pretty significant, Joe. I know we have a customer recently too that is working with us on their fraud protection and doing some great stuff. So it's not just about banking, but also our capital markets customers. Can you give us an example there?
Yeah, I don't know as many of the details around the other stories, but they're very similar in terms of working with cap markets, because I have peers that cover those particular segments, and as well as the insurance market space. But you can see, just thinking about a capital markets, right, for them to figure out how do they manage the risks, not necessarily in terms of maybe financial, security and financial crime, but probably more so in the area of how do I ensure that I have enough, cash on hand? How do I ensure that my assets under management are all being taken care of properly? And so whether it's that one or modernizing core platforms is very similar. In enabling a green financial services industry has been different for Citi, for example. So there's regardless of what slant you take to solving a capital markets challenge, there's always an underlying data platform strategy about how to modernize and optimize.
Yeah, Joe. So, another area for us in U.S. financial services is insurance. What can you share about this area with our audience?
You can see that the categories are somewhat similar because there is a common thread across financial services. But if I just focus on really the differentiated policyholder experiences, Zurich had a great success story by using artificial intelligence in our platform. And what it allowed them to do was basically interrogate or investigate or discover across 2,500 different employees how the contracts were being developed, what were being changes in the contracts, how could they actually get a better portfolio experience for their customer by adding artificial intelligence, scanning all of those documents, pulling out the differences, looking for best practices, looking for risks that's involved. Maybe a particular agent put in something in a contract that got past auditing. Those types of things is where Zurich has been incredibly happy with what we've done for them.
Yeah, no, so data transformation has just been a huge topic, especially here on FSI Fridays. And data modernization is what we're focused on today with you. What's your perspective around this and where Microsoft can help our financial services customers with this challenge?
Yeah, we have a lot of these conversations, and to us, they kind of fall in three buckets with our customers, regardless of what vertical they were in. It's really around when I'm thinking about digital transformation and that whole end story. When I get to the data piece, there's different ways to do that. And one of the things we always start with is a lot of our customers still have on-prem data sets. So how can we modernize what's sitting on-prem for you? The second one would be is getting that data to Azure, which is what most people think of in terms of digital transformation, or to the cloud. And then lastly, also the cloud scale analytics, not just your transactional systems, but how do you get your analytical systems to the cloud?
So Joe, let's double click into maybe each one of these different areas a little bit more further. So for many of our financial services customers, most of their data, like you mentioned, isn't in the on-premises environment inside of a data center. So when they think about modernizing their data, what is the approach that they should take?
Mostly the conversation is around the SQL Server footprint with us for respect from Microsoft, realizing that they have other probably relational systems and other non-relational systems on-prem as well. We can talk about that, but usually the conversation with us and our customers goes, here's my SQL Server footprint. This is what it looks like. This is the digital transformation project that I'm trying to achieve. How can we take this process or application that's backed by SQL Server and modernize it even without going to the cloud? And we have a ton of technology within SQL Server 2019 to help really facilitate that modernization. So things like backing up directly natively to the cloud, that functionality is built into the product. You basically go in and set a credential and then tell me where your blob store is. And SQL Server manages the rest. Things like being able to scale across the cloud even when your data is on-prem. So there's kind of two ways we can enable that, right? Having an always-on availability cluster that one node is sitting on-prem and the other node is sitting in the cloud. That's one way to do that. We also have a feature that's built into SQL Server 2019 that's called Stretch Database that allows you to basically take part of your database that you have on-prem and just take a sliver of it. Maybe it's the archive section. Maybe you have 7 years of transactions or contracts or something, and you want to push just maybe the last, the previous 5 years and keep the last 2 on-prem. We can easily do that just by a small where clause and then a setting that pushes that last 5 years up to the cloud.
Yeah, Joe, I mean, that's a great example of, making that transition, especially through a stretch database. So, and customers aren't going to just flip the switch and make an immediate jump to the cloud. They're in a hybrid situation today. They'll probably leverage that. I do see Azure Arc on this list. Do you mind talking to us what Azure Arc is and its capabilities and benefits it provides?
Yeah, great. No, Azure Arc is really new to the stack in terms of, and most people would think this is primarily an infrastructure play, but we have a data component to it. So at its root, Azure Arc is really a service to manage your cloud assets, as well as your on-prem assets, as well as your edge assets across using a common model. So a lot of this is becoming containerized as we move to future platforms. And it's really taking the best of what we've learned from Azure and then applying it to any data set, regardless of where it lives. We can actually, with Azure Arc, we can manage infrastructures across all 3 clouds, and then we can manage on-prem or on the edge. There is a data component too, but we've enabled SQL Server to run inside of Azure Arc so that you can think of being able to containerize your SQL Server implementations that are supporting those applications that are supporting your digital transformation and being able to manage that in one pane of glass.
So Joe, you talked about Azure Arc really about managing containers and using data in those containers. That portability piece, as you mentioned, is probably really key. But how does the edge fit into all of this?
Yeah, SQL Server Edge is a newer offering for us. SQL Server Edge fits in the concept of there's so much analytical work going on today, and probably the most applicable scenario from a financial services perspective is thinking of maybe ATMs in terms of being remote, disconnected, or occasionally connected devices, and having a database that actually can score data, execute machine learning, and be highly secure and compliant and perform it all at the same time, built on the history of what we had from a SQL Server perspective. That's really what the SQL Server Edge brings to the table.
Joe, what we see on this slide with SQL Server, Azure Arc, SQL Database Edge really sets up a good foundation for our customers' journey. But when you think about, first-party offerings for data modernization, can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, this is where we spend a majority of our time as cloud solution architects dedicated to our financial services customers. And I'll start kind of really on the left-hand side, which is really just SQL Server. So I talked about in terms of you have different options with SQL Server. For example, it depends also how you want to modernize your environment, right? Whether you're going to rehost, refactor, re-architect, or rebuild your scenario with this application or business process might determine how you use any one of these solutions across this continuum. So if I think about just SQL Server in general, a lot of people start with the rehost piece, and you can run Azure SQL in virtual machines on Azure. Been doing that for a long time. It's a very common pattern for a company who wants to modernize a platform, and this is the beginning step. Let's just pick up the workload and move it into Azure. One of the things, even just by doing that, you get it into Azure, there's the concept of registering a machine that's running SQL Server in Azure, and then you get PaaS-like benefits, platform as a service benefits. So you get to basically get backups automatically taken care of you. You don't have to worry about those. We do that. The second piece is you get automated patching. Now, those are both opt-in pieces. You can actually register your SQL Server VM and don't have to get those, but it's completely opt-in. So that's lift and shift is the first part of a SQL Server modernization story. What we spend a ton of our time is customers realize the value of cloud and want to get to platform as a service offerings. And so that's where we talk really mostly around Azure SQL Database and Azure SQL Managed Instance. Azure SQL Database has several features that allow our customers to determine how they want to best use from a performance standpoint, from an availability standpoint, and from a cost standpoint. So things like managed pools, where we can group our Azure SQL databases together to lower our cost, or whether we're trying to have sure we have 5 nines in terms of availability and criticality to the application. There's a ton of features there. I'll focus just quickly on Azure SQL Managed Instance, which is, say you have you're used to having an application where you have not necessarily control of the operating system, but you have control of the full suite of SQL Server. So things like the SQL Server agent where you could schedule jobs. You don't have that in a PaaS world, but you absolutely do in a managed instance world. So we help customers navigate those decision points so they understand all of their offerings and choose the right one.
So Joe, our customers don't always have SQL, right? Talk to us about the other platforms within these open source databases and maybe how our first party offerings can help here.
Yeah, this has gotten to be a really hot topic just for across, because our customers have a large swath of technologies, right? If you were to go to redesign an application today, there's at least probably 15 options, counting Microsoft and others off the top of your head that you could use. And open source is certainly one of those options on the table. What we've really done is take in the best of open source world and try to figure out how to put pieces around it to make it enterprise ready and get those benefits from a scale perspective. Things like auto threat detection that was kind of built into SQL Server because we own that code base. We now have those types of features with Azure Database for Postgres. And Postgres is really taking through the roof because they have a capability to run PL SQL, which is basically the native language of Oracle. So talking to a lot of customers right now about Oracle to Azure Database for Postgres SQL migrations.
There are a lot of different options out there, like you mentioned, Joe. And those that you just mentioned are really cool from a relational standpoint. There are a lot of other popular scenarios out there. For example, NoSQL is hugely popular. Can you talk to us about what other options are there?
Yeah, so the two on the list, I'll just talk about Redis Cache for just a second, right? This is just an in-memory data store that's in a lot of new cloud native applications. And it's really as you build stateless applications and building for the cloud, you're going to need some sort of session state typically. And Redis Cache is great for that. Redis is an open source version of that in-memory store. What we've done is also, again, taken that open source artifact and then added some features around management, security, enhanceability, and performance, and added that as an offering for things like session state. Probably the bigger one that you're talking about is really the NoSQL database and Cosmos DB. This one is really key to our discussions and helping our customers modernize their applications and their data platform. This is a scale out version of a NoSQL database with multiple interfaces or modes, if you will. So for example, there's a SQL API layer to Cosmos DB. There's a MongoDB layer. So if you already have a MongoDB application running on-prem and you're wanting to modernize that, we can actually, without any code changes in that perspective, so that's essentially a refactor with no code changes, we can put that into the cloud and then just change a connection string, and you're running your Mongo application directly over Cosmos DB. That's going to have some huge advantages on the analytical side, and I'll cover those in a little bit. The other pieces around Cosmos DB is it gives this global scale database availability. One of the hardest things to do in the database world is multi-master, or being able to write to 2 different versions of or 2 different locations of a database and have them stay in sync. Azure Cosmos DB provides that with basically the flip of a switch inside of the portal.
So Joe, most of the stuff that we've just talked about is what is referred to as OLTP, or online transaction processing. Now, processing data is great, but when we think about the more and more data that our financial services customers are generating, getting insights to that data is probably even more important. This is where cloud scale analytics can really play an important factor here. Can you talk to us about where customers are leveraging these capabilities and what this is all about?
Yeah, if you kind of think back just for a second in terms of those digital transformational categories that we talked about in the beginning, all of that has an analytical or AI play underneath the covers, right? How do we better make use of the data that we have in our environment? And you typically see a diagram that looks like this, right? There's the concept of bringing in the data. There's a concept of modeling it or massaging it to get it to where I want it. There's always an aspect of storing that data. And then there's the, how do I visualize that or get that out to my end customers? And we have all of these components and they're well, tested in terms of they've been around for a while within the Azure platform and continue to get better and better as we go. I'll talk about quickly the first one is Azure Data Factory. This is an enterprise cloud class ETL or ELT. So extract, transform, and load, or extract, load, and transform, depending on which steps you take first. But it's really all about getting your data from your other systems in your environment into the analytical platform.
Thanks, Joe. In last week's FSI Fridays, we actually talked about building analytics as a service in Azure Databricks. So for those of you watching, you can go back to episode 20 for reference. But Joe, how do we take this forward?
Yeah, that was a great session. Brian DeNicola is not on my team, but I have worked with him in the past. Really enjoyed that session. Databricks is a very popular open source Spark platform that we've made it as a first-party service within our environment. It was covered last week, so I won't go into great detail, but it really, the concept of a Spark engine and a Spark cluster comes into play as we think about the future of how we think about an analytics platform. For us, a lot of the current workloads are going to Azure Synapse Analytics. It says underneath here, formerly Azure SQL Data Warehouse. I think we've kind of did ourselves a disservice and I'm glad we gave it a different name. I think what we've really got to do is differentiate. This is not just a data warehouse. So when we talk about Azure Synapse Analytics, it's the combination of both a Spark engine as well as the SQL engine from an MPP or massively parallel processing perspective. So when you get to take the power of big data and the power of a Spark open source consortium, bring those together, and then you add the capabilities of Azure Data Factory as well as Power BI on that, it's an end-to-end story.
The tools and capabilities that we've just talked about are really world-class. And as Microsoft being a true productivity company, I'm sure we can probably make this easier for our customers. And I think you alluded to that with Azure Synapse. So talk to us about what we've done with Azure Synapse and how we've taken all of these world-class tools, packages them all up into it to really enable our customers to move faster and better able to kind of manage their overall data modernization.
Yeah, as our customers build these analytical platforms, right? And they've been doing this for a while, right? Whether it's third-party tools, open source, non-Microsoft tools, Microsoft tools, a big part of building a platform like that is really how do we integrate all of those moving pieces? How do we integrate security? How do we integrate authentication? And how do we authenticate, compliance and auditing? All of those are extremely challenging efforts for our customers and financial services. And, think about all of the security and regulations that exist in our environment. That's challenging. And so one of the things, you mentioned it earlier, right? We are a productivity company at heart, right? And bringing all of these things together and making them easier to use is really what Azure Synapse Analytics is really all about. So we can take all of that Spark engine, that SQL engine, and so whether you're building a data lake, when you build it on the store, a data lake, Azure Data Lake just allows you to store blob images. So those could be CSV files, comma separated values. They could be Parquet files. They could be JSON documents. They could be just raw text. It doesn't really matter from your data lake perspective. But being able to create schema on read type of queries against that in combination with both your relational MPP or massively parallel processing solutions is critical. I think the biggest thing that I talked about and I alluded to earlier was the ability for you to actually now connect Azure Cosmos DB directly to Azure Synapse. So Cosmos DB actually stores its data in a very distributed fashion, just like any Spark engine or Azure Data Lake does. But there's really not the concept of the analytical layer over the top of that. By connecting Synapse Analytics to Cosmos DB, now you're really getting into HTAP, which is a hybrid transaction analytical platform, right? So the concept of combining both transactional processing as well as analytical processing without another copy of the data.
You know, Joe, this is super exciting how we're taking all these complex technologies, integrating with others that are super popular. And, you know, I've been at this company for 20 years, and, you know, we've definitely gone a long way with playing well with others. And it's all about not only talking the talk, but walking the walk. I would love to see, just similarly how we did with our collaboration story, showing demos on collaboration is awesome. Can we see a demo on how this all ties together?
Sure, I've got an environment. I've kind of pulled that up. This is one of my demo environments. So we're going to walk through what we really wanted to do, and the value of Synapse is bringing all of those disparate processes and services together. You can certainly use them underneath the covers individually, and our customers have been doing that for a long time to build analytical platforms. But when we ask them, like, what's the challenges? How could we make this easier? It's like, let's bring this all together, right? I still have things that I have to do to connect and all that. And that's what Synapse does. So this is what we call a Synapse Analytical Workspace. And so it's the ability to create ingestions, meaning grabbing data from any source and bringing it into the platform, the ability to explore and analyze that data, and then to visualize it as well. So one of the components I really haven't talked about is Power BI, our visualization story around all this data that we have. Power BI is going like gangbusters, and now we've integrated that directly into this experience as well. So an individual, what we're thinking, right, is typically these have been IT-like functions, right? And what we're seeing is the business enabling, and we'll call them a business analyst or power user, right? Typically the Excel guru in the business unit, right? That's someone who could actually go into Azure Synapse Workspace and create a solution from end to end. So let me just walk around this scenario quick. If you can ingest applications, I won't go through a ton of these for time's sake, and we can take a much deeper dive when you work with your individual connections at Microsoft or account teams. But think about building a connection. There it goes. And I add a new connection. One of the things that we've made sure is that Azure Synapse can connect to over 90 different sources. And you would think like we would default to Microsoft technologies. No, this is technologies all across the map in every spectrum of the world in terms of what we're delivering. So you can see things like Jira connecting to Jira, MySQL. Netezza is a big one right now with the future postponement or sunsetting of Netezza has been a big topic with our customers as well. Service Cloud from Salesforce, right? So we have all these built-in connectors that will allow you to build these connections in a very no-code way. Once you have that data or those connections in there, I'll kind of walk on the left-hand side in terms of the menu. You'll have them over here listed. There's both workspaces and linked. Workspaces are what I talked about in terms of that SQL MPP or massively parallel processing. So think of querying against large volumes, I mean petabytes of data with multiple SQL servers acting as one. That's really what an MPP solution is. So you have tons of interactions that you can do there. When you have your databases, then you develop. So you can develop in many different ways. That's also the power of Synapse is if you came from, maybe you're a business user and you're used to working in SQL or maybe even Power BI, writing some queries, maybe it's even third-party tools, right? But you know a little bit of SQL, you can jump in here and start writing SQL scripts and executing across that. So if I open this SQL script, so we have this sample data set. I'm going to just run this quick query in terms of this sample data set just to give you an idea of the scale of what's sitting here in this demo. So we're executing that. It's taking a second. So we have 30.1 billion rows in this example, and that query took basically 4.6 seconds. I've seen it run faster than that, so there might be another workload running right here at the moment. But that's not really the power piece, right?
So Joe, I mean, even just thinking about that, right? 30 billion rows, and you do that in 4 seconds, and that could be across maybe one data set, right? That's really powerful, and I think our customers can leverage this to kind of scale.
Yeah, that is incredibly powerful, Johansson. But what I think is even more wow or jaw-dropping is the concept of this query right here, which is a little more user-like, which is we're going to grab some data. We're going to go against 3 different data sets. Actually, we're going 4. We're grabbing sales data that was in the relational system or the MPP portion of analytics. Then we're going to grab some DIM customer information that's been imported via the data lake. So basically doing schema on read to our customer list. And then we're adding in some Twitter analytics feeds that are also sitting on the data lake. So think about joining across multiple systems and coming back with a query as an end user to get a business answer. I can click on that, click run. Now we're combining all of those pieces together in a single platform, and we pulled back a really complex query across multiple sets of data in, let's see, what did this, 5.3 seconds. So that really simple query, and then we even added a very complex query, still not much difference.
That's really powerful, Joe. You went from that very simple one to, this complex one where you're going across all of these different data sets. It's really kind of inspirational just to see kind of how quickly you were able to run that query in a matter of seconds, where probably in the past this may have taken hours or maybe even, depending on the size, days. So really inspirational stuff here.
Yeah, let me call out 2 more features. This is jaw-dropping, right, in terms of the innovation that we're bringing to market and available for our customers. When you talk about developing, there's also the concept of, let me scroll up one, hit the click button here, in terms of this concept of building data flows. Sometimes you're going to have to manipulate the data as you get it from different systems. This is a full-blown, drag and drop experience for non-coding people in terms of being able to build data transformations directly in here. So as I'm working, this example is grabbing data from SAP HANA, but you can start doing all types of modifications and transformations on the data as you're working with it. This is very common in any particular analytics scenario, and we've made it drag and drop easy. And the cool thing too, right, if you're a data engineer, behind this is all generating code. So if you'd much rather work in the code, you can do that as well.
I mean, that flexibility between kind of, the coding, the person that's the developer, to someone that, like myself, who's not really a developer, but can then kind of leverage these kind of drag and drop experiences, really empowers me to kind of get up to speed without relying on a developer to kind of
Absolutely.
Get all. But like, this is great in terms of how you can kind of transform data. You talked a little bit about Power BI and maybe some of that visualization. Do you want to kind of show us kind of how someone could kind of, in Azure Synapse, go from kind of importing all that data to now modeling it to then maybe visualizing it?
Yeah, once you get that data in there, you've done your transformations, you get to that particular point, this is really a powerful step to completing the journey. Typically in a customer, right, they would be handing this off to someone else to go build the visualizations. And maybe that will still happen. That is actually still a common pattern. But what we're envisioning and seeing is our high-end business users, giving them the power to build those visualizations directly. They know the data, they know how it should be visualized, how they want their end users on their business side to be able to see it. So being able to go in here and start building, if you haven't seen Power BI before, basically it gives you complete experience in terms of building your visualization. So you have all of your visualizations here. You have basically, these are all the data sets and all of the tables, whether they be external or internal to the MPP portion. They're all available to you here to start building the solution. And then the other cool piece is once you save it and publish it, this is what your end user business side sees, which is, I got to do all of that work, and now my business user gets to go in and start answering business questions with the data. So think of like, all right, I have these campaigns. I want to see what email and social did for my customers with intent to purchase, right? And so you think about how fast this is refreshing. That's 30 billion rows of data being analyzed and grouped and sorted, all for the end business user to have some context about what's happening.
Joe, I mean, this demo for me at least, and I probably can speak for Edwin, is really just jaw-dropping, as you put earlier, right? Just the speed to value here for our customers, going from ingesting data across multiple billions of rows from different databases to then modeling it to visualizing this all doing this in a very quick time frame, and even enabling our business users or a line of business folks to really kind of take this into their hands and grasp it. So a lot of great stuff here. Thank you very much for the demo. But can you just talk to our customers around maybe how they could actually get started? This may seem a little bit daunting in terms of kind of getting the ball rolling here. Yep. Talk to us around kind of what our customers can do.
Yeah, so we've got a bunch of links here in terms of maybe just getting started. So the SQL pieces that I've talked about, these are actually links out to the public sites. So Azure SQL Database, Synapse Analytics, and the Cosmos DB, I think where most customers are actually gravitating to. Don't forget the Postgres one, though. That's very popular, especially coming from other open source platforms. But what I think I like a lot as a resource for customers to get started is the free Azure Learning for data platforms. So I'll put the link in here, then I already filtered it for the data platforms. There's everything underneath the sun on that Microsoft Learn platform. So you could be a developer, you could be an infrastructure person, you could be an office person. There's so much learning out there. So I put the link in here to make sure that it filtered for data platform options. And then lastly, we have great stories for our financial services customers in terms of whether you be in banking, cap markets, or insurance. We have solutions. We have plenty of examples. The customer list that I showed on those first three slides are really just kind of hitting the top of the bucket in terms of what we have. So I encourage you to take a peek at those and then figure out what's the digital transformation application or business process I want to improve in, and then reach out to your local team.
Joe, I will be sure to add those links on the YouTube video below, and for those of you watching live. So thank you so much for sharing your time and perspective. I'm positive our viewers have learned a wealth of valuable information. What we learned today is why it's critical to start that data modernization journey and have a cloud scale analytics strategy. We went through Microsoft's rich portfolio of operational databases on Azure that are grounded in choice and flexibility for financial services organizations, empowering business analysts, data engineers, and data scientists using Azure Synapse to run near real-time business intelligent analytics, machine learning pipelines without impacting the performance of their transactional workloads. And finally, Joe went through a high-level quick overview demo showing the power of Azure Synapse, where it analyzed billions of lines of data in a few seconds, where it used to take hours or even days, and translating it into helpful visualizations through Power BI, helping the business users answer business questions that are relevant to them. Speed to value, as Johansson, you put it really nicely. If you're interested in starting the journey, or if you're in the middle of it and would like some guidance, please reach out to your account teams and we could schedule an envisioning session or follow-up. Really great stuff. Johansson, let's go ahead and move to Q&A. What are some of our viewers asking?
Thanks, Edwin. So we've got a question in here from Anonymous that talks about, you were able to bring all of this data from different data sources, but you didn't once mention security. And for our financial services customers, security and compliance is top of mind. So what's our coverage here from that perspective?
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a completely miss on my point. It is one of the most important pieces in terms of financial services customers. And so I start with just the platform itself, right? There are over 90 compliance and regulatory certifications that are all, and a ton of those are specific to the financial services industry. All of the services that I talked about today are built on top and are built around those compliance and security requirements. I think the other piece that's missing is really the integration of those service pieces. So whether it's Data Factory, whether it's formerly SQL Data Warehouse, or whether it's your reporting engine for visualizations, typically our end user customers had to kind of stitch together and make sure that security worked. The security story is now that we're bringing all that integration to pieces, we control that, we manage that. You have access to see how all the keys work and et cetera, but we're managing that and taking the complexity away for you so that when you know that when you do a read on schema across the data lake, we've securely stored the key, we're accessing the data lake securely, we're bringing that back in a secure fashion. It's really just around how all the service was constructed.
No, that's helpful, Joe. We actually have another question here from Anonymous. I have all these other non-Microsoft assets or skills. How do I get up to speed, leverage my current skill set, and apply it to this environment? Is there a huge learning curve?
Great question. So most of your applicable skills today, whether you're using third-party tools or non-Microsoft tools, will certainly be applicable, right? The strategies or the The architectures are very similar. What we try to bring in is what's the value from a Microsoft perspective in terms of how it works in managing, how does it work from a performance standpoint, is it easy to use, all of those particular pieces. So the learning curve will probably be pretty easy to get over. The integration of non-Microsoft tools is another great actual point to selling it, right? Say you're not using Data Factory, say you're using something more like Informatica or even a third-party open source integration pieces. Those all plug in, right? If once you get that data, you say you use your Informatica, you get it to the data lake, the value of Synapse still exists in terms of making sure that you can then visualize and analyze and perform analytics over the top of that data. So there's many different ways to plug in the pieces and skill sets, to the architecture.
Thanks, Joe. We've got another question in here from Anonymous that talks about moving to the platforms that we just talked about, maybe some of these first-party offerings. What's the journey like, and how can customers kind of get started with maybe moving some of their data into some of our Azure capabilities here?
Yeah, it kind of depends on where the customer's at on their journey. But for example, if a customer's already has a data lake already taken care of, they're flooding the lake, if you will. We can actually, the data then, a big part of it's already there. We can just start with the ingest concept on from an analytical standpoint. If none of that particular infrastructure or data platform is there yet, we can start by migrating any existing workloads, either doing the Data Factory or whatever third-party integration tool. That's typically not a challenge. Where we see most of our customers in having deeper discussions is when we want to slightly refactor or re-architect our modernization of our platform. And that's where we need to have a little deeper dive discussion about how we might migrate the system. A lot of variables, how big is the database, right? In terms of maybe it's relational, or even if it's NoSQL, what's the size of that? We have data migration tools. So there's a migration packs, whether you're using SQL, Cosmos, or what have you. We have that particular set of tool set and skilling. And then I would say, lastly, we have the ability to basically, if you just have volumes and volumes of data, we have the concept of basically shipping you large drives. If we think that it's going to take too long to migrate your data to Azure, we have a secure way to send you drives, load up all your data and send it to us, and we'll get it on the storage platform of your choice for you.
No, that's great, Joe. We have one last question. I'm seeing here from Anonymous. Great presentation. Where role do third-party tools play, and where are they most essential?
It could be anywhere. So that's a little bit of an open question, right? But I think the pieces, as the third-party pieces plug in, could be anywhere. You may be using a different visualization platform, right? It might take a little bit in terms of the end-to-end story for the scenario that we walk through, but it doesn't mean it can't be done. And then also another third-party scenario that's very popular is integrating our DevOps tools or GitHub into these strategies and making sure that your data platform is moving towards a CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous development type of workflows and streams, so that you get the benefit of what's happening also from a DevOps perspective.
Great. Joe, you've been an awesome guest, but it looks like we're out of time. So thanks again for attending via YouTube or watching live and asking questions. If you haven't already, please be sure to register for FSI notifications and invites by visiting aka.ms FSI Fridays. We're also open to constructive feedback, so please send us your comments and suggestions at aka.ms FSI Fridays feedback. Be sure to catch recordings of our previous sessions on the FSI Fridays YouTube channel at aka.ms FSI Fridays recap, where you can also post any follow-up questions that weren't covered today. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Joe Hansen, we have a big one at the end of this month. Why don't you give the audience a preview of what's happening next week?
Thanks, Edwin. On November 20th, we have our fireside chat with our general manager, Shaka Rashid, and our managing director, Mike Triolo, on real customer examples of how cloud computing is helping organizations move more agile and resilient, and why this is important, especially in a post-COVID world. You'll hear real examples of this in FSI and in parallel industries as we learn what's on the horizon of innovation in cloud for financial services. You won't want to miss it. Thank you, and we'll see you next time on FSI Fridays.